Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. In-person early voting begins in the crucial state of Florida today. More than 1.1 million people have already voted by absentee ballot in Florida. We'll be talking about the role early voting is playing in the campaign in just a moment. And Hurricane Sandy has been downgraded to a tropical storm, but is expected to strengthen into a hurricane again by tomorrow night. The National Weather Service warns that widespread impacts are still expected when the storm makes landfall on the East Coast as early as tomorrow. Right now, I am joined by Richard Kim, my colleague at The Nation magazine, where he is executive editor of TheNation.com. Anna Marie Cox, political columnist for the U.S. version of The Guardian and founder of the political blog Wonkette. George Packer, staff writer for The New Yorker and author of a fascinating story in next week's issue about a former lobbyist who has since become very disillusioned with Washington, D.C. And Sophia Nelson, columnist for our sister website, TheGrio.com, and a former Republican counsel to the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Great to have all of you here. All right, we are now 10 days away from the presidential election, and President Obama seems to be steadily regaining a narrow lead he held over Mitt Romney before the presidential debates began earlier this month. The latest polling averages, according to Nate Silver of the New York Times, give President Obama 50.3% of the popular vote, with Mitt Romney at 48.6%. 538's model now gives President Obama a 74% chance of winning the election based on his strong performance in several swing states. The president is hoping to capitalize on the momentum by encouraging voters in those swing states to go to the polls as soon as possible by taking advantage of early voting. As of this morning, more than 10.5 million people have already cast their ballots, including the president himself. President Obama flew back to Chicago on Thursday to take advantage of early voting in Illinois, becoming the first sitting president in history to cast a ballot early. Mitt Romney's campaign, meanwhile, has been buffeted by a series of developments this week that have put the Republican candidate on the defensive. First, the Republican candidate for Senate in Indiana, Richard Murdoch, whom Romney has endorsed, became the latest GOP candidate to make controversial comments about rape. Then one of Romney's surrogates, former New Hampshire Governor John Sununu, suggested that former Secretary of State Colin Powell had crossed party lines to endorse President Obama because of the president's race. All right, I think what we're seeing right now in the race is essentially the race regressing to the mean, basically the race going to what its stable equilibrium is. And if you go back and you look at the Nate Silver model, which the role that Nate Silver's model plays in the psychology of liberals is in and of itself is a topic we could do a whole show on. People wearing out their mouse button by clicking refresh. Yeah. Basically, the race is where it was in June. I mean, so everything it was, before everyone started campaigning, right? Mitt Romney gets the nomination. You basically have the race, and then you have the race, and now we're back to where we are, essentially. And what's been fascinating to me is this kind of meta battle over momentum. I am fascinated by the amount of energy and labor being put in by both the campaigns and kind of partisans on both sides trying to spin it that they are winning when people are just going to actually vote. Like, I really honestly don't get it.
Especially when you think about the fact that momentum is this construct that just has no application in polling. Yes. Like, momentum is really like a physical thing. Like, let's talk about, I guess there's no such thing as like having momentum in a poll. Things change all the time.
Right.
I do think it's really, I find it endearing that people put so much faith in Nate Silver's model. I think he probably finds it a little upsetting. Like, people take him and put him in this place where his whole model is to not to not put that much faith.
Well, he had first of all, there's been like a Nate Silver backlash.
Yes.
So there's like now and this goes to this thing of the way that basically the campaign, there's not new news being made on the campaign for the most part. I mean, the candidates are kind of talking about what they're talking about. We're in the home stretch. So people have been putting all their energy into like poll reading and poll spinning. And so there's now like this whole entire like right-wing world of people who are like doing Nate Silver takedowns.
It's like Nate Silver trutherism.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually disagree a little bit. I think momentum is critical if you're the Romney campaign. And what I mean by that, it's perception. It might not be real, as you pointed out, as a construct, but the Romney campaign has really created a narrative, right?
They've been trying hard
that
to, yeah.
It is, we are
yes.
on the ascendancy. We have won the debates. We showed that we are capable of running the country, being commander-in-chief. And I think that these rallies that they've had where you get these pictures with these ginormous,
one of which they photoshopped yesterday.
Right? So I heard that.
Right.
So my point is that I think momentum is something the Romney campaign definitely, it's the inevitability. And the Obama campaign, that's probably the problem.
But the big question, right, is there a causal relationship? I mean, this to me remains the undetermined thing, and we're going to actually talk to a political scientist who studies undecided voters in a little bit. Because the question is there actually a causal relationship between this kind of perception of momentum and actually pushing people off the fence who think, I want to go with that person because they're winning?
The momentum stuff is also all generated from national polls, right? So they look at the Washington Post national poll, the Gallup the poll. None of that really matters, right? It's now down to like 6 swing states, basically. I think really only 3 or 4 that are really, really in play. And in those, as Nate's analysis has showed, it's been even steadier, right? So this sort of like freak out about Romney getting 50% or even the white vote sort of, going away from Obama to Romney. 4 or 5 states. That's really where, all of this matters.
It's a little like cable news pundits after debate talking about how people out there in the country are going to see this debate.
Right.
They have no idea because they're not
talking
to
those people.
They're looking at their BlackBerry, which is getting texts and emails from who? From other consultants from the campaign. So it's this weird closed loop that pretends to have a relation to the electorate and actually doesn't.
But you said something in the green room, which hopefully you didn't say to me in confidence, which is that...
And if so, I'll never be on the show again.
No, you said to me something in the green room, which is that there is a feedback loop that you, as a political reporter, and I have had this experience too, as a political reporter, showing up to talk to voters, right? In some event, or just knocking on doors, and the things you get back from them are them saying what they heard on the news.
But here's the point, though. We have had the same political story in this country for 12 years. We are an evenly divided country. The Obama election in 2008 turned out to be a little bit of an exception because of the disaster at the end of the Bush years and the financial crisis. We have now, you said we've gone back to the default or the steady state. We've gone back to where we were in 2000. I mean, there's a story in the Washington Post about how there might be a split between the Electoral College and the popular vote. What does that remind you of? So how many ways can journalists, campaigns, and other insiders talk about that story after 12 years?
I just wanted to say that, for one thing, on the momentum story, I feel like when campaigns are doing that, they're really playing literally against each other on the momentum story. They're leaving voters out of the equation. It's a closed loop. And they're just trying to convince each other that they have momentum. It becomes this game like people have talked about 2000 when the Bush team made a big deal about trying to make a play in California. But that was all about, literally, that was playing the Gore team to try and get them to devote resources in places they didn't need to devote resources. They had nothing to do with voters.
This is a really good point about the strategic kind of game theoretical aspect of this, which is there's a finite set of resources. You are deploying that finite set of resources in a kind of strategic fashion against the other party in terms of, do you put the marginal dollar gets spent in Ohio or in Nevada or Colorado? So psyching them out actually has some actual value.
But he raises a very important point, and I think it's true. The 2000 election model is probably where we are. I've been saying this for weeks. People have been laughing at me that Romney might win that popular vote and Obama wins the Electoral College. And again, it makes us have to come back to another discussion as a country. Do we still keep the
suddenly conservatives are going to be critical of the Electoral College?
I'm happy to have that discussion.
We at The Nation magazine have long been calling for the abolition of the Electoral College. And if that's the scenario, I told Katrina, my boss, the other day, we should rethink those. But in
principles of convenience.
In reality,
magazine.
I do think there's a remote chance, if that's the scenario, that there's a sort of left-right coalition around this. You're going to have the Tea Party really freaked out, right? They already questioned the legitimacy of the 2008 election, which is indisputable. Yeah. And this is really going to sort of, and they have a point there. They have a kernel, of truth about the sort of populist will being denied, and it happened in 2000, and it could happen in 2012.
We have a whole on tomorrow's show. We're going to have your colleague Rick Hertzberg, who's been writing about National Popular Vote, constitutional scholar Akhil Amar, and we're going to sort of talk about the Electoral College and why it's there and what it does.
And how we can't get rid of it because we're stuck with the Constitution.
Well, yes, although Akhil Amar has there's an incredibly clever way around that Akhil Amar has come up with.
Now you're really talking like a Republican.
No, not with an amendment. Not with an amendment, with state laws. So here's another thing that happened this week. We all know about the Murdoch quote about rape. I'll play that in a second. We'll talk about that later in the show. But there was also this Lena Dunham ad. Lena Dunham, who is this wonderkind young writer and filmmaker who's got this HBO series Girls, which I personally like a tremendous amount. I think she's phenomenally talented. Jim Messina, campaign manager for the Obama campaign, tweeted out this link to a video that she cut. We're going to play a little bit for you. And it's kind of a remarkable video politically in a lot of ways, particularly when we talk about that equilibrium. We look about 2000, 2004. Take a look.
Your first time shouldn't be with just anybody. You want to do it with a great guy. It should be with a guy with beautiful someone who really cares about and understands women. A guy who cares whether you get health insurance, and specifically whether you get birth control. The consequences are huge. You want to do it with a guy who brought the troops out of Iraq. You don't want a guy who says, oh, hey, I'm at the library studying, when really he's out not signing the Lilly Ledbetter Act. Or who thinks that gay people should never have beautiful, complicated weddings of the kind we see on Bravo or TLC all the time. It's a fun game to say, who are you voting for? And they say, I don't want to tell you. And you say, no, who are you voting for? And they go, guess. Think about how you want to spend those 4 years. In college age time, that's 150 years. It's also super uncool to be out and about. Someone says, did you vote? And you go, no, I wasn't ready. My first time voting was amazing. It was this line in the sand. Before I was a girl, now I was a woman. I went to the polling station, I pulled back the curtain, I voted for Barack Obama.
All right, so there's an obvious metaphor. I think the best adjective to describe that would be cheeky. It precipitated like a combination of total fake outrage and genuine outrage, I think, on the right. And I want to talk about this ad, not because it's, in the news cycle and people are getting mad about it, but to me it says something profound about the political calculation of where we are, because I want you to think for a second. Would John Kerry have cut that ad in 2004? No freaking way. They would not have touched that ad in 2004 with a 1,000,000-foot pole. And I want to ask you guys why that is right after we take this break. So we just played the Lena Dunham ad that has this embedded metaphor about the first time and equating voting and sex.
I want to see the Kid Rock ad saying the first time he had... Sorry,
no,
I won't go there.
No. But the question I love, George, you have done political reporting. You did political reporting in 2004.
No, in 8.
I'm sorry, in 2008. Yeah. It seems to me that the country has changed. The Democrats' conception of where the electorate has changed insofar as they're willing to do that ad.
Right. I mean, I grew up, in the 70s and 80s when social issues were all for the Republicans, and Democrats tried to avoid them. And it seems that things have turned. And now, Democrats just, whenever the subject of women comes up, they just assume that it's going to work in their favor. And it often seems to. There's a gender gap, and abortion rights are a huge issue in this election. So I think Lena Dunham is their main line into young women in their early 20s who, maybe they're worried aren't going to come out and vote, and somehow this is the way to get them revved up. To me, it's a slightly insulting view of the motivations of the voting habits of young women, but what do I know about them? I'm over 50.
I agree with George wholeheartedly. I think that the challenge for me is with this ad is that it says that the economic issue doesn't matter as much as a social issue. And if you look at the trends and if you look at Romney, let's face it. Wait, let me finish. The Republicans have been a nightmare on this issue of abortion, on rape, and everything else. The gender gap should be huge. And the issue is that you see Romney still neck and neck in an electorate where women should be concerned about those issues. But it says to me that economics is still driving this.
This is not.
That's what I think.
There are 2 points I want to make. One is in the town hall debate. When Obama said, for the first time, I remember him clearly saying, reproductive rights is not a social issue. It's not a women's issue. It's an economic issue. I think women understand that. And also, there's that Gallup poll that came out, I guess, last week that polled swing state voters, and women put reproductive rights as the #1 issue they're facing.
I don't know that I believe
that.
Let me also say, she name checks it Lilly Ledbetter
and the Iraq War.
Iraq War, which are also not social issues.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. And I finished.
I was just going to say that the ad makes me uncomfortable as a not so young woman. But maybe I'm just gotten prudish in my old age. But I think that it's not insulting to young women, in part because if you're still, the people who are going to vote for Obama or who aren't thinking about voting for Obama are not going to be offended by that ad. And I think that's sort of the thing that you're pointing at, this sort of turn in sensibilities that's really changed for Democrats. And that Obama has been able to lead, partially, let's face it, on the basis of his personality and his charisma.
And also this forward-leaning, this is what's so fascinating, who is the instigator in the quote-unquote culture war, right? And that, to me, one of the dominant themes of this campaign that has been fascinating is that watching, particularly covering the 2004 race, in which the right was the instigator. Karl Rove put the gay marriage ballot stuff in the states. They wanted to fight about that stuff, and there was this entire left literature that got produced. Tom Frank, What's the Matter with Kansas, and then a whole bunch of kind of lesser versions of that argument. about the ways in which social issues were used as a wedge to manipulate voters to vote against their economic interests, and it just seems like we're on the other side of it.
But I would agree with you in part that the video is not even so much about the social issues. It's made almost entirely in the register of the emotional. It's about a feeling, and that's what's unnerving, not the sex, but the emotion behind it, that she would liken her feelings about Obama, this sort of keening adoration, this unshakable love for him, as if he were the guy she lost her virginity to.
Yeah.
And that sort of capacity, but that capacity for Obama to elicit that sort of extra-rational, hyper-emotional response has infuriated his critics on both left and right. It was Paul Krugman that first trotted out the sort of cult of personality argument about Obama during the 2008 primary, and it's what, the Tea Party goes crazy about it, and so do Glenn Greenwald's followers on Twitter. And I think that's actually a really interesting question of whether or not that sort of hyper-emotional response for Obama is enduring.
And whether
is that going to reflect itself in the 2012 polls? And if he wins, is there the capacity for him to sort of use that to affect a realignment towards the Democratic Party?
I think it died sometime around the summer of 2009. I mean, to me, this ad reminded me of that horrible Yes We Can video where all those celebrities did their little piece of that song.
I'm not familiar with that video.
From 2008. And were you involved in that?
No.
And it's as if Lena Dunham doesn't know that this is 2012 and Obama is actually a reasonably popular president.
That's a great point. You say that, but the fact of the matter is, I think this is something that I think the national media has missed a little bit. There's a Times article about the ground game, and the lead was all about how, like, last time it was this passionate, fervent undertaking, and now it's this joyless grind, right? That was the lead. And
Which is like losing your virginity versus, the 30th year of marriage.
Let's do this, not extend this metaphor for the duration of the 2 hours of the show. but I actually think that is definitely the story, and there's absolutely a core truth to that, because there is a difference. But what it misses is that there are literally millions of people in this country who do feel as fervently, who still feel that way about the president. And I know this because, this is a full disclosure thing too. My brother's a state director in Nevada for the Obama campaign. And so I know what he's doing, and he's spending his whole life talking to volunteers and folks like that. And there remains a tremendous amount of this kind of intense, powerful, passionate, personal identification of the president.
Is the question into votes? Does it translate into votes?
I think it might. I mean, I think it is starting to. I mean, the early voting and stuff. And I think also this is sort of the trade-off of people only paying attention to politics every 4 years, right? I mean, the people who really were excited about Obama and voting for Obama in 2008 maybe kind of like went off, okay, he's doing his thing, and now come back and see the Obama that we saw like in the last two debates and currently we're seeing on TV is the same guy that people voted for in 2008. He's got that charisma. He's got that, God, I hate the word swagger, but I'm going to use the word swagger. Right. He runs ads like this. He's doing things that seem really different. So if you closed your eyes and didn't just not pay attention to the economic stuff, but didn't pay attention to like how joyless a grind the presidency has been,
right.
It would be understandable to think that you were being involved in that same kind of passion that you were involved in.
But I think unquestionably,
hold that thought, because I also want to defend extra rationality right after we take this break. I just want to tell all of you that Twitter is telling me that we sound out of touch and yesterday with our prudish recoiling at the.
I actually so guilty for that.
Let me say for the record, I thought the video was good, and I thought it was kind of funny. And again, the adjective cheeky is like it's not the biggest deal in the world. What was interesting to me about the video is the decision to make it and put it out there, as opposed to the video itself, because it's a decision about a political calculation that has Democrats in a relationship to certain kind of cultural touchstones and touching things that can be seen as taboo that they never would have had before.
Well, and they're in trouble with young voters. I mean, that's the really clear thing that will happen on November 6th, that young voters will turn out in smaller numbers than they did, smaller percentages than they did in 2008, and that they will vote for Obama in less of a percentage than they did in 2008. And that's troubling for them.
Chris, the thing that just troubled me about it, it's not the topic. It's the the appeal. It's that, anyone who was liberal in the 80s felt that the Republicans were all about just appealing to irrational emotions using symbols, that they had mastered it. That was what Newt
Culture war
Gingrich
symbology.
learned. That was what Ronald Reagan did so well, that he became a kind of personality cult figure. It appears that Republicans now come at economic issues, with 5-point plans, and Democrats appeal to vague feelings of, times are changing and the Republicans are no longer with it.
But this 5-point plan is as much a symbology as anything else.
Yeah,
it's fake, too.
Of course it is. It's all pretense. I'm just saying, where do you pretend tells a lot about what you think the country is.
I want to argue with that, and I promised I would argue and make a case for hyperrationality, which I think there is this case. I think there is this degree to which I think the liberal version of this argument, which is the God, guns, and gays argument, right, which is that these people, these other folks, have been tricked into not pursuing their own self-interest because they have been diverted by attention to these cultural signifiers.
Right.
And my feeling about that...
And that's wrong, by the way.
And that's wrong. And my feeling about that, both with conservative voters and with liberal voters, and again, I think there's a ton of substance to what Lena Dunham's saying there, actually, and birth control, I think, is incredibly substantive economically. But even when you're talking at the level of cultural signifier, is that voting is an expression of a human being in all their manifest, self-contradictory craziness. And that's what human beings are, and they care about different things, and they care about cultural identification, and they care about who recognizes them, who sees them, and those are perfectly legitimate things
cannot have it both ways.
Yeah,
they cannot. They cannot.
Well, it depends on what the costs are. I mean, I think what happens if you go on whatever, we're going to have to come up with a new alliterative slogan for the opposite of God, guns, and gays. But if you do this, sort of cultural, social issue symbology, and run on personality, the danger is if things get worse, all that turns on its head the same way that it has for...
Go ahead. My challenge with this ad, though, is likening a vote for Barack Obama, the President of the United States, to your first sexual experience as a virgin. Doesn't make us a prude. Is that appropriate? And then Jim Messina tweeting it out.
Sure.
I mean, that's my... I'm not touching that. The bottom line is, I think that is really the issue. I think we all agree what she said. She's entitled to that. You're right, Chris. People can feel how they want to feel, but is it appropriate?
I think this connects to what happened with John Sununu this week, actually, right? And it connects to the argument the Romney campaign has been making is basically the Obama machine is trying to hoodwink people into not thinking about its record, into not thinking about the economy. And so when former Secretary of State and Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell comes up and endorses Barack Obama for the second time, he did it in 2008. It was a huge deal in 2008. I know that people around the McCain campaign have told me that it really hurt them. It really kind of pushed Obama over the edge. He comes back, he does it again, and here's John Sununu on another cable network talking about why that was the case.
Colin Powell has decided to opt for President Obama again, despite apparently still being a Republican. Is it time he left the party, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure how important that is. I do like the fact that Colin Powell's boss, George Herbert Walker Bush, has endorsed Mitt Romney all along. And frankly, when you take a look at Colin Powell, you have to wonder whether that's an endorsement based on issues or whether he's got a slightly different reason for preferring President Obama.
What reason would that be?
Well, I think when you have somebody of your own race that you're proud of being president of the United States, I applaud Colin for standing with him.
This is why I'm not a Republican anymore. This is a perfect example of, and I say this on national TV, when John Sununu is the GOP poster boy and spokesman, and he says stuff like that, that is why Colin Powell and people like myself and others, we're still, we may lean that way, but we don't want to own it because of people like that. They're completely out of touch. Talk about out of touch. Mm-hmm. You're supporting the President of the United States because he's black. Maybe in 2008, I will admit, when I voted for President Obama, first Democrat I ever voted for in my life, President Obama, part of it was that he was African American. I won't lie. It was history. I think all of us would own a piece of that. But the second time around, he has a record now. And to suggest that is just offensive.
And Romney has a record. And also, there's a degree to which this the amount of condescension in Sununu's attitude on this is so extraordinary.
Yeah. Can I also say this? Every time people talk about this, black voters voting for black candidates, the history of the American Republic is black people having to vote for white people.
Absolutely.
No one votes for people of a different race more reliably and historically than African Americans. Americans who just have been voting for white people for years and years and years and years. And you know who votes for white people? Also, white people vote for white people.
Someone on Twitter said, like, this explains all the write-in votes for Bill Cosby all over the place.
That's right, yeah. All right, the truth about voters who say they're undecided. That's next. Every 4 years, the nation turns its lonely eyes to an extremely small, extremely hard to understand group of the electorate, the mythic undecided voter. This group, which according to polls makes up anywhere from roughly 2 to 8% of the electorate, is lavished with attention from all corners in the waning days of presidential campaigns. On Wednesday, according to pool reports, President Obama spoke on a conference call to 9,000 voters who say they have not yet made up their mind, a last-ditch effort to persuade those seemingly immune to persuasion. Undecided voters are brought in to ask the questions during debates, and they are impaneled by networks to react to those debates. And because the undecided voter is so hard to categorize, every cycle, political strategists inevitably come up with a catchy label to try to explain who exactly these people are.
All three boys happen to play soccer, so that makes you, in the eyes of political strategists, a soccer mom.
Out of touch is a phrase soccer moms often use to describe Dole.
We don't have soccer moms anymore. We have security moms.
So-called security moms.
All those soccer moms or waitress moms, whatever they are.
People call waitress moms.
Walmart moms. They are the demographic that is all coveted this year.
I've worked on the Walmart Moms Research Project.
Joining me now is Lynn Vavreck, co-author of The Gamble, Choice and Chance in the 2012 presidential election, a professor of political science at UCLA. Lynn, it's great to have you at the table.
It's great to be here.
You've been doing research on voters who are undecided and tracking them, quite a big database of them over the course of the election. What do we get right and wrong about who these voters are?
Well, we have about 1,600 of them in our panel, so we can take a pretty close look at them. And one of the things I think that is a myth about undecided voters is that they're low information voters. And I think it's true that they have less political knowledge, but I really like to engage the conversation about the other 95% of the electorate whose preferences are stable a year from the election until today. Right? So is that a more informed vote? The whole campaign goes by and those people never move. So in terms of information, I'm not sure we are fair to say that undecided voters are low information. They for sure know less about politics. They pay less attention to news. They're less interested in politics. All of those things are true.
Give me that. Okay. Cash out that distinction for me. You're saying all the things you just said there conform with the stereotypes we have, right? More disengaged,
yes.
Watch the news less. I've seen data that showed in undecided voters, 4 out of 10 couldn't tell you which party had the majority in the House, and another 2 out of 10 thought the Democrats were the majority in the House. So that's 60% of the voters who either don't know or have it wrong.
They absolutely know less than people who make up their minds early, and they have positions on issues that tend to be more moderate, or they don't have a position at all. They'll say, I'm just not sure on simple things. Do you approve or disapprove of Barack Obama's handling of the economy? And more undecided voters will say, gee, I'm just not sure.
I have a question. Is it that they don't care, or what's their motivation? Like, why are they like this? I'm curious.
Well, I've stared at these numbers a long time, trying to tease out exactly what's going on with these people. And two sort of analogies that I like is they're a little bit of just a faded image of an early deciding voter. Everything's a little less vibrant for them.
Low conviction voters, low passion voters.
They're just not interested in politics. Wow. It's not a hobby for them. They are not watching us right now. They're doing something else.
Right.
And the other thing is their dictionary, political dictionary, doesn't work very well. It's like it's a foreign language and they can't interpret it.
This to me is really a profound insight. And I in 2004, before I was sort of a full-time journalist, I took 2 months off and I went and canvassed in Dane County around Madison, Wisconsin, which is a lot of swing voters there. And we were doing a persuasion canvass. Knock on the door, ask the person if they're decided or not. If they're decided, you go to the next door. If they're undecided, you engage them in a conversation. So I did this for 2 months and talked to a lot of undecided voters. And the biggest thing that jumped out to me was that when we talk about issues, we think issues are a coherent conceptual category that essentially cleaves the world at its joints, right? If I hired anyone at this table and said, I'm hiring you to run the website for the Romney or Obama campaign, you would know what things to put in the headings, right? About economy, debt, fiscal, healthcare, energy, whatever. But those are constructed by a constant conversation that we're having politically. And if you're not engaged in that, it doesn't necessarily make sense that those issues cohere in the way that they do to all of us transparently.
This is a great conversation, and it goes back to what you guys talked about in the last segment about symbols, political symbols. And for us and for people for whom politics is a hobby, the symbols make sense. They've been infused with meaning by people like all of you, and they know what they mean. But for these less engaged, undecided voters, those symbols don't mean anything to them.
But between us and them is, 95% of America. I mean, it's not as though you're either a pundit on TV or you're an undecided voter. So there must be something that's keeping them from joining the overwhelming majority.
Those unengaged voters, I think maybe their unengagement makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, let's imagine you're sort of tabula rasa, put in Ohio for the last 2 months, right? You see these presidential debates that exclude so many issues that need to be fact-checked and are deeply confusing. You see these ads, and it's a really compelling case to say that they're not in this political system because the political system really sucks.
Well, but the other thing I would say is that my argument would be that partisanship, right? So when you look at the other people, right, who are deciding a year out, that we talk so. We talk a lot of smack about partisanship. Oh, America's so partisan. We're more polarized than ever. Partisanship is terrible. Partisanship is a really rational, kind of clean and efficient way of reducing the cognitive load for people that have busy lives and are doing a lot of things, right? Which is, it actually makes a lot of sense. And in fact, the fact that there is this correlation between higher information voters and partisanship, I think should tell us something. So I want to hear you respond to that, right, if we take this break.
Right.
Together with a focus group of uncommitted voters in Orlando over at the University of Central Florida. Soledad, how did it go?
If you were watching on TV, you saw those squiggly lines. Those were our very focus group watchers, and you were getting to see what they were thinking. Tone was very important to the folks in the focus group. We could see it. We were watching the squiggles.
So you're going to vote for Obama? I'm teetering right there. All I need is the little...
This is serious. Of course it has something to do. It has something to do with integrity. It has something to do with honesty. It has something to do with they lied about it.
Hold on. We are on live television, and I have lost control.
How many of you have now made up your mind and have a choice, have a candidate? Raise your hand. Anybody? Anybody? Okay.
Some of the great undecided voter panels we've been treated to over this election season. I think it's part of what I do think people who do pay a lot of attention to politics start to feel kind of resentment toward, like, why do these people get all the attention when they are the less engaged? Why? The argument I made before we go to break is about partisanship as being a very efficient means of roughly calculating which political coalition you're part of. Isn't that true? Shouldn't we have everyone just...
It's absolutely the truth that party identification is a great shortcut. And most voters use shortcuts. This idea that there are voters out there who go out and research the issues and gather the information and think about their own preferences and figure out who's... People are using party as a cue. And, 95% of self-described Democrats are going to vote for Barack Obama, and similarly among Republicans and Mitt Romney. And they knew that in December of 2011, and they haven't moved. So the number of people who are shifting in and out of undecided and the number of people who are actually bleeding to the other candidate is small.
Isn't it also true of independents? They say they're independent, but they actually are closet Democrats or Republicans and always vote the same way.
You can push them and they'll lean one direction. There are very few pure independents.
Yeah, we actually have a little bit of data on this. I think it actually... possibly comes from you, Lynn. This is that most undecided voters actually identify with a party.
Yeah,
right?
About half.
About half of them identify with a party, and we can see that there. That the largest plurality independently are independents, but there's weak and lean Republican and lean Democrat, strong and weak as well.
So, Lynn, is it a myth then that the undecided voter, the independent voter, is that a myth of sorts?
Well, what's interesting about this is that party as a cue for these undecided voters, it doesn't work as well.
Right.
So that number I said for early deciders was 95% will vote their party. Among the undecided voters who have come to decisions, we're following them over the whole year. And as they make up their mind, we know who they're voting for. And only 65% of those self-described partisans are voting for their party. So again, this is what I mean about the dictionary doesn't work as well.
But once you get down to that. You say that of the people who have some party preference, still 65% are going to vote for the party that they prefer, right? So you take those people off the table. Then a certain amount of these people aren't going to vote, right? That's the other thing about them. That when you keep calling people up, you're calling them 3 weeks before the election in a polling, and they say, I'm undecided. There's a pretty high chance they're just not going to motivate themselves to go vote.
I have a question. Is there, in your study, is there a cohort of undecided voters that are actually very high information, that they know an awful lot, but they don't feel that the current partisan framework speaks either Republican or Democrat for them, and that's why they're sort of undecided?
Yeah, you can. There's a small set of people for whom that's true.
Okay.
But it is really not. Those are sort of not the majority.
Most interesting conversation I had when I was canvassing in 2004 was a couple that were very pro-life environmentalists. And this was the rare, mythic, cross-pressured, very high information swing voter.
One of the questions I have is, I'd be curious of your analysis. 2008 was a historic election year. We had an African American that had won the major party nomination. 1 in 5 Republicans, 20%, voted for President Obama, then candidate Obama. My question is, are people going to, now that it's not a historic election, do we come back again to our natural inclinations? I mean, we were kind of having this discussion in the green room about
resetting to the kind of natural partisan division.
Right. Well, I was thinking about this as I was listening to you guys, and so I did a little bit of data crunching while you were doing your first.
Gotta love it.
And I thought, because I wondered, I hadn't looked actually, who did the undecided voters vote for in 2008? And it turns out that a majority, 50%, about half of them voted for Barack Obama. About 30% voted for John McCain in 2008, and 10% voted, they said they voted for someone else. So the question, I think, is, do we think that history is a guide and they will fall back on habit and vote for him again, or is it they just
break towards the challenger?
They can't do it, and so that's why they're.
I want to ask you about increasing partisanship and why that's happening. Why are there fewer people who behave like this as we go through time? Right, if we take a break.